So to step back to the beginning of your story, what first experiences sparked your interest in law?
It's an interesting question. Probably just reading. My mother was a library. She was a woman who, because of the fact that she had a husband who didn't believe in, quote unquote, going over the bridge. In order to get off Cape Cod, you have to go over the bridge. She basically lived her life through later her children's exploits and the library. So she read everything, and I was always a reader. I read everything in sight. In the 8th grade, I read what's the book about Andersonville, about the Civil War. Fascinating, incredible, awful prisoner of war camp in the Civil War era. I don't think that I had a particular interest in becoming a lawyer early on. About 9th grade, 10th grade, I became interested in the law of criminology. You study about people who used to do things like take your head and measure the bumps and decide whether you were going to be a sadist or a criminal. And that area of the world fascinated me. I had no desire to go into medicine, although the sister, who was my eldest sibling, was interested in medicine. We talk about that. She became a nurse. But when I got to Dartmouth and I began doing things like facing Vietnam, and not particularly being interested in being shot at, I'm not very good with a rifle. I remember I joined ROTC as a junior in college and washed out of that in about 2 months because I wasn't interested in having to go face cleaning my M1 or whatever the hell it was we had as a weapon back in those days. So I decided to apply to law school because I had this government professor who would, he was a really decent professor. He was a very good teacher. Harvard and Harvard Law, and there were guys in my class who were going to apply to law school, and we began talking at it and talking about it, and I decided I'd apply to law school and didn't know much about the law schools. I think about the ones I didn't get into. I didn't get into St. John's. It's like, what? I got waitlisted someplace as well, it seems to me, but Yale sent a comeuppance. I had an interview with the then about to retire Dean of Admissions at Yale Law School. Fascinating elderly man. We literally sat, he was there for the whole weekend, so we sat through 2 other people's interviews, just shooting the breeze and having a wonderful time talking about stuff. And, I got in, and New Haven became my first big town. I'd never lived in a city before of any consequence. So law school came late as an idea, but, I enjoyed the law school experience. My classmates were amazing. The president of the class at Yale Law School was a black woman. Stanford and Yale Law School. Graduated 1966. Not one private firm in America of consequence that she looked at would even think about offering her a job. So she led tours to Italy for 3 years, and she found a job as an assistant attorney general in Anchorage, Alaska. She's from Westchester. She retired from that position about 10 years ago. When we had reunions, she would catch the king salmon, and we would have the best bagels and lox known to man. But anyway, the law it's been a very rewarding experience for me. Neither of my children has any desire to be involved with it, but my daughter let me read all of her contracts early on until I said, "You're an entertainment lawyer." But I've had a good time practicing law. It's been a lot of fun, a lot of work, a lot of heartbreak. All you have to do is try one murder case and lose it, and you'll know all of the things that you didn't think you could do right or wrong, that you might have done right or wrong that cost somebody 25 years of their life. So I'm happy with the career I chose. It's been interesting. I met lots of interesting people. And here we go. there are 10 lawyers here in this office, none of whom I hired. In Hartford, I hired almost all of the lawyers in the office because there weren't any lawyers there. But I'm accommodating myself to the people here, and I've discovered that they like me, I like them, and we're, I think, doing the city's work, which is God's work. I don't think there's a more interesting variety of practice, and I think I've done just about all of it, than being a municipal lawyer, because every pimple in the world of law gets plucked here. And we have a lot of time, a lot of fun representing the city, representing the city's people. It's an interesting experience. And, you know, because I did it 6 years someplace else, I had an upper hand. Although New Haven is very, very different from Hartford. It's very different probably from any city in the state. Hartford had a city council of 10 people, 9 people. They were paid $35,000 each, and they had a staff. Each one had a staff person. New Haven, and the mayor was elected for 4 years. New Haven, the mayor's elected for 2 years. There are 30 alders. There's somebody barking from every street corner, it seems like, and managing that large a crowd of people and thinking that they are fully apprised about the stuff about which they vote is illusory, in my opinion, and sad. So that the city of New Haven gets some decent representation in terms of its government. But with all due respect, I think the Board of Alders, which unfortunately has become more powerful by each change in the charter, is not the most appropriate form of government that a city this size can have. So that's a long answer to a short question.
Well, stepping back again to your early legal career, you talked about a member of your class having difficulty finding a job after graduating from Yale Law School. What sort of obstacles did you face in your early legal career?
Well, I didn't choose to go sauntering off into New York, into the big law firm world, so I didn't get that thrown up in my face. Early on in this town, I met Frank Deneen, who I think is still practicing law in the Legal Aid Association in New Haven. Is he president of the Legal Assistance Association as well?
Yeah, I don't know what his title is, but he's still practicing.
Yeah, and I became fascinated with the people who did the kind of work that they were doing. I did a clerkship with a fellow who was 2 years ahead of me in law school, named Leander Charles Gray, and he was the neighborhood lawyer in the Newhall Legal Assistance Association office. And I was a clerk there, the only clerk. There was another lawyer there from West Haven by the name of Jim Marshall. Both of them were terrific lawyers and terrific people. And I got very deeply involved in the work that office did. I mean, back then they had just passed rules, I guess they were not legislation, that allowed supervised law students to try cases. I had my first case in court against a Hartford lawyer who brought a foreclosure action against his black family and was struggling mightily to keep their house. And he brought the action in Hartford. So we let him get judgment while we were negotiating with the people who our clients worked for. And then I moved to reopen the judgment because you can't bring a foreclosure action except where the property is. Duh. And we got the case reopened, and the landlord and the people that the family worked with and for kept the house for them. And it was, it was kind of, wow, this is cool. Working with Leander Gray, we did a lot of very serious criminal work. We had a couple of murder cases, nasty, awful stuff. But he was a brilliant lawyer, a brilliant writer, man who I think really literally believed that 15 minutes at his desk was a night's sleep. He became his father's partner at one point, a long time ago. Dick Jacobs and Leander Gray and Shelley Messenger, right, back then. So I got tutored by some very fine people, and I broke into a world that needed a lawyer, and I was more needed than I was shunted aside. I got used to the foolishness of going into a courthouse in New London or Norwich or Litchfield, where I'd be the only black person in town, let alone the only black lawyer. And you get past that because I'd done the stint with Arnold Markel as a prosecutor. There were a lot of judges in the system who knew me. So I didn't get a lot of baloney from judges who would look around and decide that they were going to not deal with a black lawyer or somebody of color in their courtroom. So I didn't have really bad experiences. I had a couple of judges who were really kind of untoward toward everybody and untoward toward me, but I got past that. It's a question of adequately preparing your case and going in and making an argument that maybe somebody's never heard of before. I had a case involving the rule against perpetuities in Litchfield, which we won on the papers. The rule against perpetuities has to do with not being able to transfer property back and forth between people during the course of their lives. And this man owned a restaurant in Litchfield, Greek restaurant, married a woman whose mother had told her brother, take care of your sister before she died. The brother gave the sister this incredibly beautiful farm property in about 20 acres. But he had a provision in the deed that said, if you ever decide to sell this property, you or your survivor, you have to offer it to me for $5,000. It was probably worth $3 or $4 million when he gave it to her, but anyway, she passes away. The husband decides he's closing his restaurant, he wants to go live another life, maybe go back to the old country, and he goes, he puts the property on the market, and the brother shows up, $5,000, give it back to me. We talked to a title company, and they said, he doesn't have to pay you, we'll pay you to prosecute this case. And we brought an action under the rule against perpetuities and under the rule about alienation of property, and we won on the papers. And my client got to own his property and sell it for a decent piece of money. And those kinds of experiences in the law have always been wonderful, that you can take and change somebody's life when somebody else is trying to literally take his life or end his life or warp his or her life. It's a big deal. I had a divorce case. I had the record for the longest divorce case in Connecticut history for 3, 4, 5 years before somebody in Fairfield County wiped it out. 38 trial days to a judge in Hartford. My client was a commercial real estate owner. He owned his own company. They did commercial and residential real estate. The wife did the residential, he did the commercial. They were married for 20 years. They had a young son who unfortunately they both, with all due respect to them, destroyed. My client owned a 23-room cottage in Old Saybrook in Fenwick on the island. He was from the Colt family. And when we cleaned his stuff out of the house that the couple owned in West Hartford, the only thing he was really interested in was a gold Colt 45 with pearl handles and gold bullets, which fascinated the West Hartford police officer who was our guide that day. But we tried that case for 38 trial days, and we got everything, including the dog. We wiped the woman out. She was arrested on a warrant issued by the divorce court judge for perjuring herself because she was into affairs, which she would confess, interestingly enough, to a little old man who had an estate practice. He was a former senior partner at Robinson and Cole. And I put him on the stand after having put on 3 of the men. Back then, adultery was still a crime, so all of them took the 5th. I put this old man on and asked him if Mrs. W. had ever confessed to him that she'd had relations with other men. And he said, yes, I seem to recall she did describe to me certain of her peccadillos. And you can't make that stuff up, you know. So anyway, it's been an interesting haul.
What changes have you seen as the bench and bar have diversified?
Well, Lowell Weicker, who was one of my favorite people for lots of reasons, put me on the Judicial Selection Commission in about 1992. It was so interesting. I took the place of a lawyer from Shipman and Goodwin who'd been on the commission before and had only started his second term there, and had decided he wanted to be on the State's Attorney's Commission. Turned out 5 law firms in the state basically ran all of those commissions. And these guys would go literally, and they were all men, all white men, would go from commission to commission, chair to chair. And Weicker, for lots of interesting reasons, I'd met him many years before. He called me one day out of the blue when I was at Ribicoff and Kotkin and said he was looking for a black person, male or female, to work in his office on small businesses. He was a big proponent of small business entities. And I found him a young man who had gone to Amherst and UConn Law School, who worked for Lowell Weicker for 10 years. And Weicker never forgot that. So he called me up one day and asked me if I wanted to be on judicial selection. I said, sure. So I went, and I was the first black lawyer ever on that commission. The first 6 months I was on, we used to meet at the Lawn Club in New Haven, excuse me. They now meet, I think, in one of the meeting rooms in City Hall. But anyway, no women. I think in 6 months we saw one woman. And no Hispanics, no blacks, no Asians. Just amazing. So I read the statute some more and discovered that I could actually solicit people to come and apply to be considered to be on a list from which a governor might pick their name, all things being equal. And I went around and solicited younger people, who I thought would be good candidates, and promised them nothing more than you may not get by me, let alone getting by the panel. And as a result, Weicker went out of office and John Rowland came in. He made either 10 or 11 black and Hispanic judges who I had solicited to come and be candidates. I was a founder of something called the George W. Crawford Law Association, and it's now called the George W. Crawford Black Lawyers Association. George Crawford was Booker T. Washington's houseboy, grew up in Talladega, Alabama, graduated from Talladega University and applied to 2 law schools, Harvard and Yale, got into both of them. Took a steamboat up from Alabama to New Haven, never left. There's a housing complex in the city named after him. He practiced law till he was 95. He was a brilliant trial lawyer. He was a brilliant man, and he was huge. He must have been 6'5", 6'6" at least. I met him when I was a very young lawyer. He was still alive. He rewrote the Connecticut Probate Code. He was the first black probate judge in this state back then. And we put together an organization in Hartford for young black lawyers who were interested in just being comrades in arms, as it were, without arms. And I chose the name because I figured, well, he graduated in 1906. He must have been the first black to graduate Yale Law School. He was not, by the way. I didn't do my research, but it's still an appropriate name for the organization because he practiced law for so many years in New Haven. Connecticut still, to this day, is ferociously underrepresented in terms of black lawyers as partners in private law firms. It's a spell that we should get over, but I'm not sure that we ever will. I just got my 50th practice year pin. There was one black in that group of 40 or 50 people were still alive from that long ago, and one woman. So, first black woman to be admitted to the Connecticut bar, 1974. I went to law school with the first black woman who became admitted to the Mississippi bar, 1965. So, I was the first black in a firm larger than 5 in the history of the state of Connecticut. It's been a very slow climb for minority lawyers in Connecticut, and it still is.
All right, I think you've told us a couple of these already, but could you share some of the most interesting cases you've been a part of?
Well, we talked about the murder case. It involved a 300-pound homosexual male who was beaten to death with a golf club in his bedroom. And my kid was arrested 13 months after the offense. He was a young punk in New London. I found the murderer, tried to convince the jury that this guy, who actually, by the way, found the body, he worked with the victim. He was an Argentine, I think, dark-complected, big afro, had a pay-for-play relationship with the victim, which he claimed ended. On the evening of the killing, he went to the victim's building. It was an apartment house. It was the old poorhouse in New London. And said he did not go in, but couldn't account for his time for 4 hours that night. Did he kill him? I don't know. But did Mikey kill him? Hell no. But the jury convicted him after a 16 or 18-day trial. We challenged the makeup of the grand jury, challenged everything. And that experience was very telling. I'd done tons and tons of criminal work before, but I'd never had a murder case. And you got somebody's life hanging in your lap. Going home at night was an interesting experience. What have I done wrong? What haven't I done right? Where am I going with this case? That was one of the biggies. The divorce case was one of the biggies. Mr. Vetrano's case was another one of the great and wonderful ones. That was the developer of the West Farms Mall shopping center that I made mention of. I probably could come up with 20 or 30 more, but that's enough for now, unless you want to press me. I do tax appeal work here, and I'm in the midst of a monster tax appeal for the city of New Haven involving the English Station. You know the English Station? The English Station is back in 1904, I think, United Illuminating acquired a piece of property on what's called the Mill River in New Haven. The Mill River flows in off the ocean and runs right smack dab into a somewhat down and out neighborhood off Grand Avenue. And they built a power plant on this island, and it was called, I'm not sure why it's called the English Station, but they pumped out electricity and pumped in every variety of bad thing that you can put in water or on land, PCBs and the worst kinds of pollutants that you can imagine into the water and into the buildings. And then in 1998, I think it was, UI left. They just buttoned up the building full of asbestos and went away. Then they sold the building to a company that was going to go in and run a power plant there. Didn't do any of the cleanup at all, particularly. That company sold the property to a couple of people. Actually, they created 2 LLCs. There's a piece of the property that's just one small building, and there's the big giant power plant property, and they're both owned by 2 different LLCs, but they're controlled by the same people. And it's been sitting there forever and polluting the world forever, and you can't do anything with the property. UI was acquired this past year by a company from Europe, from Spain, Iberdrola, $3 billion. We decided it might be a good time to go talking to them about, hi, you know that piece of property that your buyer or seller or whatever you are over here owns? We think you should clean it up. George Jepson, who went to Dartmouth, that's not why he did it, is the Attorney General, and he put together a program that said that Iberdrola/UI would put up $30 million to clean the property, and at some point it would all be better. Thus far, none of those things have happened. The state, for lots of interesting reasons known only and best to them, has walked away from the deal. The city doesn't have the money. The city wanted all the money to do the cleanup because we wanted to tear the building down. So that case is ongoing. I'm doing the tax appeal because the two companies that acquired the property from the entity that bought it from UI have never paid a lick of taxes during all of the time that they have been there. So they owe us a lot of money. They have appealed the value, contending that the property is worthless. There's law in Connecticut that it's a statute that says that no assessor in a municipality has to consider the fact that the property being taxed or taxable is polluted. He just picks a value that is as if the property was clean. And if you don't like it, then take it up with the Supreme Court. But I'm in the middle of that tax appeal right now. So I still do a lot of, I don't do as much litigating as I used to. I do a lot of organizing, supervising work here, but I like the courtroom, so.
I think you talked about this briefly before I started recording, but could you talk a little bit about the diversity of your class in college and law school?
Well, Dartmouth, 2 blacks out of 558, 1 in the class of 1964, so there was no diversity. I didn't have a particularly bad time as a black student. I think there were so few of us that we basically got ignored. But the other fellow in my class was a spectacular athlete. He rode 150-pound crew. He rode stroke in 150-pound crew, which means you're a nut because you got to up in the middle of the winter and you're trudging through the woods with this stupid thing, this shell over your head. But he was a physics major, so it's not like we ever ran into one another in class. And he graduated Dartmouth and went on to Union Theological Seminary for 4 years. Then he went back to the University of Massachusetts and got a master's in physics, and then disappeared. Words were years ago that he was teaching English to German students in Germany. And he died recently. We all think that basically he was recruited by the CIA and did whatever they did, because there was literally no history of him anywhere. But law school was better. Yale has always been better. There were 9 or 10 of us in my class, and as I said, the class president was a black woman. There was a fellow in my class who became Mandela's lawyer in South Africa, Haywood Burns, who was a Harvard undergrad and had written a book. Several of the people that I went to law school with had already written their first book. By the time they got to law school, at least their first book. Joe Lieberman was like that. He had his first book by the time he graduated law school, maybe before he got to law school, on former head of the Democratic National Committee from Hartford, John Bailey. Thank you.
That was his
Yeah. So I've been in a lot of schools, a lot of high schools, a lot of grade schools, because I'm a firm believer in pulling up and bringing up. When I was at Hartford at Corporation Counsel, every instant I was there for 6 years, I had at least 2 black women law students from UConn. There were no black men to pick from, or if there were, they were like pearls that some of the big law firms would not let escape. But I've had spectacular success with the young people who worked for me from the law school at UConn. The first young woman by herself, took a job at Shipman and Goodwin in the summer. They didn't offer her a job, so she took a job with the largest law firm in the world and worked in their Boston and European offices, and then with the Attorney General in Massachusetts. Now she works in New York. one of the, I drafted 2 young women, and I was looking at one of them only from UConn. And I went to an event where she was mouthing off. This a tiny little Cape Verdean woman, as it turns out, smart as she could be. She had 2 degrees before she came to law school. And I told her I wanted her to come work with me, and she said, well, if I come, she comes. She was my best friend. I said, I only need one. I took them both. The former, the little Cape Verdean woman, now is a full professor of criminal law at Indiana, having gotten one of 2 such fellowships that there are in the country to go get her LLM at the University of Wisconsin. Her partner in crime is is counsel to the controller for the state of Connecticut. Just amazing young people who've done amazing good things. Matt Ritter worked for me for 3 years while he was in law school. He's Tom Ritter's son, the legislator, and Matt's, I think, running for the state senate now. He's a rep at the State House in Hartford. So I've seen lots and lots of opportunities wasted by big law firms who haven't given the minority lawyers who are around an opportunity to shine, because the ones that I've known are pretty spectacular people.
Okay. I think now I'm going to open the floor and see if any of my colleagues have questions.
John, I was struck by your account of how you came to leave the Ribicoff and Kotkin firm, that after having been there for so many years, and having already proven yourself as a commercial litigator, they announced.
Actually, it was the firm that succeeded Ribicoff and Kotkin. Ribicoff and Kotkin just decided that they didn't want any of the 7 or 9 of us because we proposed to them to have a partnership agreement.
Right.
The firm that was founded after that, which eventually, I'm trying to remember what the name eventually became, but started out as Burns, Slater, Loudon, Burns, Slater, Sheckman, and Rose. That firm, I think I never made more money working in a private law firm than I made in that firm in the years I was there, from like 77 or 79 until 84. We were extremely successful. The firm grew to be 25 lawyers and started out as 7 or 9. We were doing all kinds of wonderful, incredible work. The senior most of the partners there, Bruce Loudon, still has a significant divorce practice. I think he only represents men in West Hartford. And Jim Byrne, who came out of Cravath, I think, in New York, and he came to Ribicoff and Kotkin to work. He was